Welcome to Capital Link's Trending News podcast series. In this podcast series, we discuss with company management on recent news and announcements they have made. I'm Nicholas Bornois, president of Capital Link, and we have with us today Mr. Peter Zacho, the CEO of Navigator Holdings. Our discussion today will touch upon the recent announcement by Navigator Holdings of the signature of a non-binding memorandum of understanding with Bumi Armada Berhad, one of the world's largest floating infrastructure operators, to establish a joint venture company to provide CO2 shipping and injection solutions in the United Kingdom. A quick reminder of our disclaimer before we delve into the discussion that our podcasts are provided purely for informational and educational purposes. They do not constitute investment advice or advice of any kind. And for further disclosure, Capital Link has the privilege to work with the Navigator on investor relations. So Navigator Holdings, for those who may not know the company well, trades on the NYSE under the ticker symbol NVGS, and is the owner and operator of the world's largest fleet of handysize liquefied gas carriers, and a global leader in the seaborne transportation of petrochemical gases such as ethylene and ethane, liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, and ammonia. Furthermore, Navigator owns a 50% share through a joint venture in an ethylene export marine terminal at Morgan's Point. And with this, I will welcome Matt to our discussion today. Congratulations on the signing of this MOU. As I understand, this is the third JV you're having. You have one 50-50 with Enterprise Product Partners for the Morgan's Point terminal. You have one 60-40 with Greater Bay Gas, and now the one with the Bumi Armada. So, quoting from the press release that you issued on June 20, this JV aims to provide an end-to-end solution for carbon emitters to capture, transport, sequester, and store their carbon dioxide emissions in line with the UK's industrial decarbonization strategy. So, Matt, please describe to us what is included in this JV in terms of assets and functions in the value chain, and what is the JV aiming to establish?
Yeah, thanks a lot, and thanks for those questions. We're very excited about it, so I look forward to discussing it with you here. It's as it says, it's a joint venture with Bumi Armada. What we're establishing here is a one-stop shop for emitters that want to dispose of CO2 into permanent storage. And we're starting out offering this service in the UK. So this is basically what it's about. So Navigator would be transporting the CO2 from the key of the emitters out to the injection vessel. The injection vessel will be owned and operated by Bumi Armada, and they will then inject it into the seabed. So we do have a joint venture which is open for more partners. For instance, in the form of a storage company that owns the right to deposit CO2 into the seabed, so that we can provide this one-stop shop where the emitter basically has to hand it over to us, and we'll take care of it from there. So we'll be the market originator. So we'll provide this flexible solution to the emitters and tailor the individual projects to each emitter. So we'll provide a virtual CO2 pipeline that is very cost efficient, because we are mindful here that this is taxpayers' money, this is the customers' money that we are dealing with here, and we will want to make sure that the CO2 is deposited the cheapest and most efficient way possible.
But if I understand correctly, the value chain, this floating CO2 pipeline, it involves several links in the chain and several assets, collecting the CO2, transporting it, and disposing of it. Are you focusing mainly on the marine transportation end of it, or also on the collection and disposal?
No, the collection, the carbon capture will be done by the emitters themselves, and then you could say liquefied and stored on the quay. So we'll take it from there. We'll take it from the quay and to the permanent storage. That's what we specialize in, and those are the key skills that we have internally.
So your function will be on the marine end of it, marine transportation end of it.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So going now to the potential clients for this JV, you mentioned that it will serve emitters also with no access to pipeline infrastructure to effectively manage their CO2 emissions. So the potential client base, does it include marine, non-marine emitters? What exactly is the potential here?
Yeah, at the onset, it will mainly be the UK-based emitters, so they will be land-based. So that will typically be, let's say, a very large power plant, but it could also be industrial facilities that emit large quantities of CO2. We're starting out with the power plants because each individual power plant may emit up to more than 1 million tons of CO2 per year. So we're starting with the largest ones and those that are clustered. So here, when they have no pipeline access, we would be the ideal partner for them to transport and store their CO2. And there are a number of these clusters around the UK, and those could, you could say, have, let's say, 2 to 3 million tons together of annual CO2 emissions that we can take care of. That would be an efficient size for us to set up the infrastructure around.
So given that, I mean, you mentioned already the size of the market, you mentioned that you will be focusing on the UK, but I understand that this is a global market. So since we're going to be involved on the marine transportation end of it, potentially it opens you up.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, in the release, we mentioned that we believe that the market for CO2 emitters that are not linked to pipelines could be maybe 30 million tons per year. So it's very sizable. If we expand that into Europe overall, the number may be 200 million tons plus per annum. And of course, if we extend that to the rest of the world, we're talking gigatons or thousands of millions of tons. So it's very, very large volumes that we are seeing here. And that means that globally, we could see hundreds of CO2 vessels shuttling CO2 and depositing into the seabed. So it is a very, very large market. And obviously, we will only be a small part of that overall market, but we think there's definitely sufficient business to a large number of players here.
Max, given everybody's focus on the environment, on decarbonization, on CO2 capture, and so on, can I assume that this particular initiative is a pioneering initiative and at the very early growth stage?
Yes, it is early stage. I mean, we have spent months now discussing with partners throughout the value chain and with the regulators as well. So I think we've taken this already quite far, but this is an entirely new market. This is something that no one has really done before, and that means that there are a lot of moving parts that we need to sort out before we can place the firm orders, before we can tie up the contracts with the emitters. My guess would be that it would take about 3 years from final investment decision on the side of the emitters before it will be actually operational. And during those 3 years, a lot of things have to happen. That would be the building of the CO2 ships, the building of the injection vessel, the construction of the carbon capture storage infrastructure at the emitter site. This will all work in parallel, but of course, this will only start happening once the contractual setup is in place. And it will take a little bit of time before that contractual setup is entirely finalized. So I think that would probably take at least a year or so. So it's not something that will start, you could say, transporting and pumping CO2 into the seabed in a year or two. It will take a little bit longer. But that being said, a number of governments, including the UK and a number of other European governments, have committed to quite ambitious CO2 reduction targets. And here, carbon capture storage and permanent storage in the seabed is a vital part of that. So we need to get going if we want to help the governments meet their 2030 objectives.
Well, you do have the first mover advantage, clearly, and I have to say you did already answer 2 of my questions in terms of how long it will take for the value chain to commence operations. You said 3 years, and you mentioned about the role that Navigator will play in the operation of the JV. The one question that I had is, what is the size of the capital investment and how will it be funded?
Yeah, so you could say if you look at the entire investment, of course, on the emitter side, there'll be the carbon capture equipment here. There'll be the liquefaction of the CO2. There'll be the storage part of it. On our side, it would be the building and the construction of the CO2 carriers, and they will be more expensive than the current gas tankers that we are operating today. And then, of course, there will also be on Bumi Armada's side the construction of the injection vessels. And I think if you take all that capex together, we are talking in the hundreds of millions of dollars per cluster. So altogether, of course, this is a very, very sizable capital investment. This is a capital-intensive business. So that's also why the structuring part that we're doing up front here is very, very important, that we get that all right before we start constructing vessels or building equipment for carbon capture.
Very, very interesting. So one last question. Can you elaborate, please, how this JV fits into the profile of Navigator as an owner, primarily an operator of vessels engaged in the seaborne transportation services for petrochemical gases? And how does it benefit your shareholders?
Yeah, I think this is the core competence and the DNA of Navigator is to provide safe, reliable, and efficient transport of liquefied gases. And this is exactly what we are talking about here. So it plays directly and straight into the key competencies of our organization and our business today. We are looking to be a key enabler of this green transition, the energy transition. It's at the core of Navigator's strategy as it's spelled out, and as we will elaborate on when we send out our ESG report that will come out in this following week. Engaging with infrastructure on the land side as well to connect with our marine assets is also something that we have done to great extent on our Morgan's Point terminal for ethylene export. So already here we have some knowledge and some experience on linking the land side and the marine assets together in a longer supply chain. So I think all these things play really well together so that this project, you could say, is squarely at the center of our strategy and our competencies. When you look at it from the shareholders' perspective, it's something that will contribute to growing the business of Navigator. And with these long-term stable cash flows that will come with the contract structure that we are setting up, this is, of course, an additional benefit for the shareholders. These will be contracts that will be 15-year, 20-year or longer. So it'll be very long-term projects that will be set up. And this is, of course, of great benefit to the shareholders of Navigator as well.
So, Mats, are you going to be building those vessels, which will be quite expensive, as you mentioned, on the back of those contracts?
Yes, exactly. So once those contracts are entered into, that's when the investment decision and the ordering of the vessel will take place. So it has to be on the basis of that. And that also means that when we start talking about the financing side of it, it'll of course be something where both capital providers globally, including the banks, would be very interested, because most of the emitters are very strong credits, many of them investment grade, and of course having them back a long fixed contract is something that will be very attractive for a financier. And that means that we would be able to finance it, I expect, at attractive levels further, you could say, bringing benefits to the project.
It's very obvious, exactly, that I think the parties we're going to engage here are quite credible, and based on the long-term contracts, I think that would create a very financeable situation for the banks.
Yes.
If I can ask you as the last question, do you have, let's say, a minimum size of vessels that you were planning to start with, or?
No, I think right now we're still flexible. Of course, it has to be something that will be sufficient to substantiate the construction of an injection vessel for Bumi Armada, and also for the CO2 carriers that we'll be investing in. So we are talking about the million tons plus per annum and higher than that before it becomes economical to operate expensive assets like this. But I think that's probably not going to be the bottleneck, again, because of the prospective market size, and then it's just up for us to make sure that we engage with the right clusters and the emitters here. So I think that's probably not going to be an issue.
Any closing remarks before we finish our discussion?
Well, I'd just say that if you have a strong belief that this energy transition is needed and is going to happen, if you think that the transportation of CO2 at sea is going to be a big and growing market, I think Navigator is a good way to play that bet on the energy transition, because not only do we plan to transport CO2, we also plan to be a large player in the transport of ammonia, green and blue, which are also markets that we haven't talked so much about today, but in other podcasts, very large and also growing markets. I think if you combine those very large growing markets together with our existing business, you'll see that we have quite our hands full in terms of growth opportunities and very attractive ones indeed. So that's just what I wanted to mention here. So it's a good existing robust business and some very exciting growth opportunities in the green transition.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today and for really providing a lot of clarity on this very exciting new development. So we had with us Mats-Peter Zacho, the CEO of Navigator Holdings. And again, Mats, thank you very, very much for sharing your insight with us.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. My pleasure.